In my previous video about normalization, I referenced an episode of Linus Tech Tips, where the girlfriend of one of Linus's employees had this exchange.
That's fine.
No, it's not.
I'm looking at,
It's all men, you'll never do any better.
It's all men? Well, it's a good thing I'm queered.
It's obvious what's being said here. She's disappointed for something small. Linus says all men are like this, so get used to it. She replies with, I can also date women. But she didn't say, good thing I'm bi. She didn't even say, good thing I'm queer. She said, good thing I'm queered. Historically, queer meant something that was strange or odd. Eventually, queer came to be used as a slur for gay or trans people. After the rise of the first gay rights movements, queer was reclaimed by gay and trans people as an umbrella term describing somebody who's not straight or cis. But queered is specifically a past tense word. Historically, the word queered or queering meant specifically to render something odd, the act of making something queer. But it had a specific subtext of decay. It wasn't only making something abnormal, it was making it abnormal through the process of spoiling. Like if your food had gone bad, you could say the food's spoiled, or you could also say the food's queered. Once the queer theory train had fully left the station in the 1980s, queering was initially used to describe the process of applying queer theory to literature. The wiki page on the topic describes an example of queering as re-examining the primary sources from the life of King Richard I to search for evidence that he exhibited homosexual behavior or attitudes. It's important to note that this search doesn't necessarily mean that he engaged in homosexual behaviors or was gay, but instead it embraces a fluid spectrum of gender attitudes. If celibate monks wrote letters of affection to him, that could be a form of romantic love, even if they never had sex, or even consciously considered their behavior to be romantic. In other words, when you get retards who, for example, insist that Frodo and Sam are gay, they're queering the characters, and the gay interpretation of Frodo and Sam's characters are queered. It doesn't matter what Tolkien's intentions actually were, or even what the text itself says. What matters is what parts of the text shine like a semen stain under a blacklight when you put the queer theory lens on. Beyond analyzing literature, or films or games, queering simply means to make something more queer. For example, in the utterly useless cultural studies article, Disco and the Queering of the Dance Floor, it's argued that because disco was transgressive for the time, some spaces in the disco subculture allowed for men to dance with men and women to dance with women, subverting dance norms, and therefore queering dance. So what does it mean when a real person says about themselves, I'm queered? Is she bisexual? Probably, but bisexual isn't the word she chose to use. And most normal gay or bi or trans people, especially if they're not all that political, tend to just call themselves gay or bi or trans and leave it at that. Is she non-binary? She doesn't appear to be. Her pronouns are she, her. Is she trans? I mean, maybe, but I've got a pretty refined transdar at this point, and this looks like somebody who's probably biologically female. I mentioned at the end of my Link is a Twink video that the next wave of trans activism is claiming all types of gender nonconformity as trans, under the broader trans umbrella. For example, these activists claim that tomboys are trans, even though they don't experience gender dysphoria, but they're still trans because their gender presentation isn't traditionally feminine. The trans umbrella is the same thing as what queer now means in 2024. It's the Q in LGBTQ. This video isn't strictly about queer theory. I do intend to do a deep dive into that nightmare one day. This is just about what the Q means. But another concept from queer theory that we need to talk about is the rehabilitated heterosexual. This is a straight person who's attracted to the opposite sex, but chooses not to uphold the cis-heteronormative patriarchy through his actions, behaviors, and political affiliations. These people are cis and straight, but nonetheless, they adopt alternative gender and sexual expressions. A common version of this was the political lesbian of the 2000s, the radical feminist woman who lives on campus, and who was never really attracted to women, but nonetheless had sex with them as a form of political activism. And yeah, a lot of lesbians at the time 100% exploited them to get laid real easy. More generally though, they were called queer heterosexuals, which raises the question that we've been grappling with this whole time. What does the Q in LGBTQ mean if straight and cis people can be it? The answer is found in that Demon Mama clip that I keep using over and over because it's just so fucking stupid.
What would be the problem with dear gender? There would be nothing wrong with dear gender. Do you want to know why there would be no problem with dear gender? Because gender is a category of self-identification that means what you want it to mean. And it means what you engage, it refers to how you engage socially and how you assert your own identity. So yeah, it is fair to say that gender is essentially an aesthetic.
If, like Demon Mama says, gender is just an aesthetic, then anybody can adopt it. It's just a mask that you can take on and off as you like. This position also overrides the moral urgency of trans activism, which I went into in more detail in another recent video. If gender dysphoria is this deadly condition that must be taken seriously due to the mental distress of dysphoria causing this massively increased suicide risk, claiming that gender is just an aesthetic that can be freely chosen completely undermines that position. It also makes the TERF argument that trans women are performing womenface the way that actors once performed blackface a lot stronger. This is what the Q in LGBTQ is: the aesthetic of being gay, lesbian, bisexual, or trans. You might actually be some of those things, but being queer doesn't demand that you are. This is why drag queens are considered LGBTQ representation, even though straight cis men can be drag queens. A viewer gave me an article for the Weekly Sip, 5 characters from your childhood that really should have been queer. I'm not reading this garbage again, so I'll just TLDR it. According to this person, Jenny from My Life as a Teenage Robot is trans because her discomfort with her own robot body is a type of dysphoria. Velma from Scooby-Doo is a lesbian because she looks like a 1970s butch lesbian, which was actually intended, by the way. Fred and Daphne were the straight edge kids, Shaggy was the stoner, and Velma was the dyke. They just couldn't make it explicit back then, and they since have, so fine, I actually believe this one. Her logic for Danny from Danny Phantom is just retarded. Miss Frizzle from the Magic School Bus is queer because she's quirky and energetic and wears outlandish outfits. And finally, the Addams Family is queer because they're all very odd people, and yet they're open and welcoming and completely ignorant of how strange they appear to outsiders. This is another example of the action of queering characters using the lens of queer theory. But the final two are the most important for this discussion: Miss Frizzle and the Addams Family. In both cases, what makes them queer is the fact that they're energetic, upbeat, happy, positive, and weird. Miss Frizzle has this pastel aesthetic going on, the Addams Family a gothic one. But what matters is they're both aggressively outside the norm, and that is what makes them queer. A quick search online for the phrase queer icon, especially in lefty spaces, will reveal that the vast majority of queer icons aren't actually lesbians, gays, bisexuals, or trans. They're just characters or sometimes real people who are aggressively outside the norm. I guarantee you the woman from the Linus Tech Tips video didn't actually think this far into the conversation, by the way. She just seems like a generic theater art hoe who regurgitates the latest progressive talking points to keep herself in her friend group. But when she said, "I'm queered," that's not really a statement about her sexuality or her gender identity. It's a statement about her big hipster glasses, her Miss Frizzle hair, her bright, garish yellow overalls. This is shaping up to be exactly the same thing I said about her in the previous video. In fact, I made a joke previously about her probably having a set of big hoop earrings in Anita Sarkeesian style, and in a future Linus video she actually showed up with a set of hoop earrings. Did I call it or what? Of course, don't go harassing this person, guys. She appears to be a private individual, not a public figure, not a YouTuber. She only shows up in Linus's channel occasionally by virtue of dating one of the writers. The few public social media posts where she's present reaffirms my hypothesis that her queer identity is largely just a tomboy aesthetic. Which brings us to the central question of this video. If the LGBTQ movement is a political advocacy mechanism for lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and trannies, disregarding the fact that they all have different needs and goals and they're all oppressed in different ways, especially the trannies, what does adding the Q to the mix actually bring to the table? The answer is, the Q brings the aesthetic. It allows the inclusion of entitled straight cis people, the LGBT allies with rainbow-dyed hair and useless humanities degrees who are in no way related to any gay or trans issue. It allows them to feel like they're part of a minority, as well as reaping all of the associated social clout in our current culture of intersectional minoritarianism. It opens the doors of the LGBT community to mass appeal. And yes, more people coming in brings more political power, but it also comes with the co-opting of the subculture and the identity. It gives straight people a way to put on the LGBT clothing, to morally instruct the LGBT community, and seize that community's resources and spaces as they expand into the movement. In short, it's 2024, guys. You don't even need to suck a dick to be gay anymore. Get a queer hairstyle, wear a rainbow bracelet, and you too can be the face of the movement. What's interesting is that a lot of socialists will claim that this is rainbow capitalism, that it's actually big corpos who fly rainbow flags to get money, and they don't actually give a shit about the movement. And you know what? That's true. But the problem with their analysis is that it presupposes that capitalism is the source of this state of affairs. It's not. The corpos are simply reacting to what the activists are doing. They see money to be made, and they're making it. The source of rainbow capitalism isn't the capitalists, it's the Q in LGBTQ. As soon as the activists turned queerness into an aesthetic that could be capitalized, the capitalists did so. If you're a socialist who's mad about rainbow capitalism, it's not really the fault of the capitalists. It's your own damn fault for being a sellout in the first place. A long time ago, I did a video about how being gay is not on its own a personality. I think I used this very same tweet, in fact, where professional fighting game player Sonic Fox said, people who say gay isn't a personality are fucking idiots and 100% homophobic. If being gay is your entire personality, not only are you boring as fuck, you're also a part of the queer problem. Normal, sensible people don't feel the need to discuss their sexuality constantly, straight or gay or anything else. They don't wear it like a label. They don't make it a cornerstone of who they are. The gay people I know in real life, they're just normal people. They're not going on about the movement or the struggle or pride or whatever the fuck 24/7. They're just getting on with their life, which is how it should be. But that way of living is looked down on by the activists, who view it as assimilationist, refusing to engage in the revolutionary queer struggle and living like a straight person, despite, being gay. The end result of this view is that all sorts of degeneracy, from public sexual activity to pedophilia, not all of it though, not the Alabama child brides, not the libertarians lowering the age of consent, just the leftist-friendly pedophilia. It's all political praxis. It's the method by which they queer society. And the gay or trans person who lives normally and integrates successfully into society is the assimilationist. He might be materially gay or trans, but he is politically straight and cis. In short, the gay person who lives a normal life can actually be oppressive on a homophobic axis towards the straight person who adopts the queer aesthetic, because the straight person's politics are queer revolutionary, and the gay person's politics are counter-revolutionary. Now maybe you think I'm just pulling all this out of my ass, that I'm just some anti-LGBTQ bigot. Well, you know what? You don't gotta take my word for it. Michael Foucault is considered to be one of the historic greats of critical theory. Professor David Halperin, a queer theorist who's currently active in academia, wrote a book analyzing Foucault's work titled Saint Foucault, Towards a Gay Hagiography. Let's see what he has to say on this topic. Queer identity need not be grounded in any positive truth or in any stable reality. As the very word implies, queer does not name some natural kind or refer to some determinate object. It acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm. Queer is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, the dominant. It is an identity without an essence. Queer, then, demarcates not a positivity, but a positionality vis-a-vis the normative. A positionality not restricted to lesbians and gays. It describes a horizon of possibility whose precise extent and heterogeneous scope cannot, in principle, be delimited in advance. It is from the eccentric positionality occupied by the queer subject that it may become possible to envision a variety of possibilities for reordering the relations among sexual behaviors, erotic identities, constructions of gender, forms of knowledge, regimes of enunciation, logics of representation, modes of self-constitution, and practices of community. For restructuring, that is, the relations among power, truth, and desire. In other words, in the view of at least one prominent queer theorist, the Q in LGBTQ doesn't refer to anything concrete. It can be adopted by anybody, and its purpose is not descriptive of a sexuality or an identity. It is explicitly political. It exists to undermine the old order and bring in a new one. In practical terms, you can have a person who isn't gay, isn't trans, but simply adopts the aesthetic of being gay or trans, and then that person gains access to all of the moral weight of the LGBTQ movement. They can then begin engaging in politically disruptive or subversive behaviors, in some cases even abusive behaviors, depending on their level of clout. And if you disagree with them, you're a straight, cis, white, male oppressor, even if you happen to not be straight, or cis, or white, or male, because in taking up a counter-revolutionary position, you have adopted the straight, cis, white, male politics and aesthetic. If this is all starting to sound a bit too confusing, let me put it this way. Remember back in 2020, when Joe Biden, a white guy, said to a black guy, "If you're thinking about voting Trump, you ain't black"?
Listen, you got to come see us when you come to New York, VP Biden.
I will.
It's a long way until November. We got more questions.
You got more questions, but I tell you, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
It don't have nothing to do with Trump. It has to do with the fact I want something for my community. I would love to see.
Take a look at my record, man. I extended the voting rights 25 years. I have a record that is second to none.
Or on that one Twitch panel where a black progressive called an Asian conservative a white male?
Do you believe that you have a different relationship with the social and political systems in society based on who you are? You are a white, I'm assuming middle-class Asian American.
He must have misspoke, right?
White presenting, I should say.
You know what, dude? Mad props for the double down. Call him a fucking cracker, man. Fucking go for it, dude. What?
I'm white presenting?
Wait.
What?
A white presenting Asian.
What the heck?
Let me rephrase that.
Can you look at me right now?
In both of these cases, the same analysis can be applied, but for race instead of queerness. Political black with a capital B isn't the same thing as being a member of one race or another. It's a matter of adopting a specific political stance. And when you do, you can actually live out Rachel Dolezal's greatest dream. You can be a white black person. To be queer in 2024 is like that, but for gay and trans people instead. Listen, I know a lot of gay and trans people at this point, and you know me, both Naomi and I like a good trap too. Almost everyone I encounter nowadays from this community is just done with the LGBTQ movement. They're sick of pride, they're sick of the kink discourse, they're sick of the grooming conversations. They hate all of this shit. The rollback of legal rights in the right wing is scary too, don't get me wrong. Especially recently, where some right-wingers were recorded in private saying that they've been appealing to the trans kids thing specifically because they intend to ban transitioning for adults, which I 100% do not agree with. That is entirely against people's autonomy, and I will never be on board with it. But do you want to know how those right-wingers got the majority of people on their side? It is, in part, because of the queer question. The poor behavior of activists, their ridiculous demands, their insane political theories, and the practical reality of their movement being a vehicle for anti-liberal subversion. We don't need to support the right wing in their moves against trans adults, but we also sure as fuck should not support queer activists either.